Hey,
Great,
Jon
welcome every.
Taylor.
Hey Tammy, it's good to be writing with you again on this. It's been a while.
It has been. The
Yeah,
change in schedule prompted a little change. So,
yeah, yeah. It's been great working with Scott too, but Tammy's the one that got me started in this, so it's always fun with her. I'm excited to see and some of our attendees. I recognize some of your names, so welcome back, and I'm glad you're here today. The topic I'm going to talk about is basic goals, values, and lifestyle, and the role that plays in connection, the role that plays in alignment, and if you're out of alignment there, some things that you can do to check that out. So I'll talk for about 10 minutes and then we can take questions either on this topic or on anything else. So most of the time when I am sitting across from couples and I say um, something like, what are the values that you guys feel like are important in, like, whether we're talking about money or whether we're talking about raising kids, usually the look I'll get back when I use the V word is this, like, um, we've 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 not done well in that area. We don't agree here, is what I'll hear a lot. Um, Differences, or I shouldn't say differences, I should say the inability to talk about differences in values, goals, and lifestyle are behind about 80% of breakups for couples. So this is it's a critical area. And again, I want you to hear the distinction there. It's a critical area to be able to talk about, not a critical area to agree on. As with most things in relationships, it's more critical that we can talk and seek understanding than it is that we agree 100%. Um, so having discussion around goals and values, the goal of talking about the differences is so that you can give each other the gift of being understood. And this can be a really hard thing to do, because when you look at a value that somebody holds or values that somebody holds, usually those come from experience that taught that person, this is important for me to fight hard for. And most of us are not raised in a way of thinking where you can love this and you can fight hard for this, and I can love this and fight hard for this, and we can still be friends. We tend to get more fractured, especially this is really interesting. There's been a lot of research coming out in the way that discourse happens, like online with people that you don't know. Instead of leading to more curiosity, which it tends to do in person, it actually leads to more divisiveness, and we get people saying or feeling more like, if this group doesn't agree with me, or if I don't agree with this group, I'll just leave it and find one that I do agree with. So rather than being motivated like we are when we talk about this face-to-face to work through differences or to value differences, we tend to just go find somewhere where there aren't differences. And I think that really undercuts some of the skills that we need in our face-to-face relationships to be able to talk things through. So listening and talking in a way that your partner can understand you and you can feel understood, it's difficult because defensiveness comes along with this almost automatically. And so really developing the ability to listen non-judgmentally is important. I'm going to talk about the speaker's responsibility in a minute, but listening non-judgmentally is important, especially if you don't know why your partner feels that way. If what your partner feels is so offensive to you, you might miss that natural question that comes up that says, "Oh, I wonder why my partner feels the way that they do." And that's a really key question that opens up, I think, some ability to talk for understanding is, how did you come to believe that, or how did you come to feel that, or why is that important to you? If your partner's unyielding, my perspective's right, and you can't have a differing set or a differing perspective and be right, that would make me wrong. That's really, really difficult to talk through that. So both of you, if you want to have a stronger relationship in this aspect, both of you have to be willing to set aside that need to be right. Not that, right and wrong doesn't exist or it's not important, but for the purpose of connecting in a relationship, it may be less about being right and more about being open, and more about being compassionate. So it's really important when you have these discussions that you can take turns in talking. So there's a clear speaker and there's a clear listener. We're not debating. So it's not, you get your 5 minutes and I'm just waiting and I'm formulating my response. It's you get your turn to talk until you feel understood. And I'm gonna keep you talking until I feel like I understand you. And then when we reach that place of understanding, I might say, there's some of my perspective and experience on this I'd like you to know about me. Are you open to listening? And then we switch roles. And that clear differentiation between who's sharing and who's listening is really important in having these conversations in a healthy way. So for a lot of couples that I work with, initially they can't do this for a lot of different reasons. When I'm working with couples who are struggling, where one party is struggling with addiction, oftentimes folks who struggle with addiction have a hard time sitting with uncomfortable feelings or sitting with paradox or contradiction. And so it's almost this like knee-jerk reaction that as soon as the paradox or the contradiction or the difficulty comes up, they have to say something, they have to make it clean. And so what I work with those people who are having a hard time sitting with the contradiction on is tolerating those feelings of discomfort so that they can actually listen. So if you're listening to this and thinking like, oh, a conversation where I felt heard would be great, I'm going to go home to my partner right now and say, I'm going to talk and you're going to listen. And then you're going to talk and I'm going to listen. It may not go so well because there has to be a commitment and a buy-in, and there has to be a certain level of skill for both of you to be able to do that. When you're speaking, this is part of the speaker's responsibility in this going well, you have to be able to share your values in a way that's not based on attacking another's values. So we see this politically all the time. I was listening to the radio the other day, and one of the presidential candidates was being interviewed, and they asked a question directly about their values, and the way they answered it was they talked about their opponent's values and how that's wrong for America is what they said. And I'm sitting there thinking like, well, I don't know anything about what you believe then. I know what this person believes, and I know that you disagree with it, but I really don't know what you believe. And just like listening to this on the radio, I think when this happens in person, it's incredibly frustrating and it shuts down dialogue. So a question to ask yourself, if there's a difference in values, goals, and lifestyle, ask yourself if when you share that with your partner, you can do it in a way that just focuses on your values, your goals, your lifestyle, and not in a way that demonizes something that's different. Because as soon as your partner gets a whiff of that, they're not going to want to talk to you anymore. My spouse and I, we try to hike together several times a week, and it's usually the time where we just kind of talk about whatever's on our minds. And I was sharing with my spouse something that I was listening to, and this author had referenced some folks and some ideas that we find, like we've talked before and we've agreed, like we find this objectionable. And I was trying to tell her, I was listening to this, and he made this reference, and he was talking about like what an important viewpoint that is, an opinion it was, and I had to sit there for a while and uncouple that from who he was saying said it. And I had to try to get to the real message. And I didn't get that far before my spouse said, it sounds like what this guy has to say is crap. If he feels this about this person, everything else he must say is crap. And I got silent and I hiked faster. And after a few minutes, she said, so are you too mad to talk to me? And I just said, it's not fun to share ideas with you when that's the response that I get. What I wanted you to understand was this experience I had of kind of sift through some of my feeling to get to the value, and it wasn't fun to talk to you with that. And don't be mistaken, I do this to her probably 15 times more than she does it to me. But when you're a speaker or a listener, it's really important that you stay away from attacking any other viewpoint and stay more focused on talking about what you are. Also, as the speaker, it can really help if you can give some of the history of why that goal or that value or that lifestyle aspect is important to you. It may, I work with couples all the time where they have differences in opinion on how much money in the bank account is a good idea to have there. I've worked with people who have said savings accounts are kind of crap because that's money that you're depriving yourself of utilizing. And I've had other people say you know, a savings account that covers 3 months of salary is essential to have, and you can't function financially without it. 9 times out of 10, when I get into couples with why they feel the way that they do, they usually have a story that explains it. The person who doesn't like to save may have grown up in a house where deprivation was the rule and they knew resources were there, but it was never utilized. The person who wants to save may have grown up in a home where there was no financial security and parents were in and out of jobs and things were unpredictable. So when we go into the history behind why we feel what we feel, it can help our partner understand us more completely. Closely related to that, is there a dream related to your goal or your value, your lifestyle? Sharing what it is we hope long term can help our partner help us understand that this isn't just an opportunity to to butt heads, but it's an opportunity where deep meaning is manifest for us. And that's usually when I can get couples to talk about deep meaning. Usually, no matter the topic, they feel closer afterward. And that's an important part of connecting. When you're the listener, it's really important to ask open-ended questions. So questions that start with, what do you think about, or what was that like for you? Questions that prompt more than a one-word answer are examples of open-ended questions. And for me, less about structuring the question and more about the feeling that you have when you're asking the question is what makes it open-ended or not. So if you're coming from a place of genuine curiosity, not I'm asking you a question I already know the answer to and I'm going to be angry when you answer it that way, but more like I really want to know. I'm asking as if I have no clue what it is you're going to say. That tends to open up a lot of dialogue and conversation. So I want to back up to the very beginning. I said about 80% of breakups are related to not being able to talk about differences in goals and values and lifestyle. So once we're able to talk about those differences, that doesn't mean that's where it ends. So we may recognize that we have a difference and, okay, I guess we agree to disagree. Only after we feel understood and we feel like we can understand our partner do we attempt negotiation. Because there will be some things, like I go back to the savings account example, for partners saying we agree to disagree, it doesn't work. But once both parties feel understood, they can enter negotiation and they can start to move in one another's direction. So a couple that I was working with a few weeks ago, we were having this financial conversation, and he was the one that felt like it was deprivation if you had a savings account, and she was the one that felt like not planning for their future or having a reserve was dangerous. And so we worked with them on feeling understood, and the compromise they came to is they were going to automate $50 of savings that they didn't touch every paycheck, which in the scheme of things for this couple, it's not that much. But simply that practice for the wife who wanted a savings, she said, if I knew that were going to an account that we weren't going to touch, that like moves me 50 yards forward on this. For the husband, what he asked for was that they could have a slush fund of a couple $100 every paycheck that they weren't going to allocate to anything ahead of time. Because for him, money meant freedom and meant flexibility. And she said, I would rather that money go into a savings account, but I can also see that we're going to spend at least that much anyway. So we can have a slush fund. And for him, it moved things forward 50 yards. But they could only get to that place where they weren't so defensive and so needing to be right after they'd really worked on understanding why there's a difference and really respecting each other for that. So as a base level, this talking about basic values, goals, and lifestyles, and especially the differences there, it requires both parties to be able to de-escalate their defensiveness and to be honest about what they feel and patient with their partner. That's a hard thing to do early on in recovery. It's also something that I've seen with the right kind of help and the right kind of guidance. I've seen that couples who haven't been able to talk about any kind of difference, I've seen them grow to a point where they can have these really beautiful, enlightening, revealing conversations about how they differ, and they can walk away valuing that. If it's not possible for you now, it can be a possibility in the future. It can be somewhere that your relationship can get to with the right kind of help.
I think it's really important. And like you said, 80%, it's the differences. I think one of the things that struck me right away, though, was if you're listening to me articulate my values, I have to know what they are. And
Yep.
it helps me understand where they're coming from. You know, just because I inherited values, or like you were sharing, you know, if somebody comes from, you know, a chaotic background and there's no money, there's not that money reassurance, then I'm going to, you know, I'm going to hold on to it. Well, you know, having the ability to examine where that all comes from. So, you know, so that I can even look at it and go, well, is that serving me well now, or whatever? You know, I mean, all of those things are really important. I've bumped up against this so many times, you know, like you mentioned, you know, politics and, you know, but it's interesting when people are so defended in something that even if you ask a question, and I really try to do it in a curious and non-threatening way, it can be perceived as, you know, challenging or confrontational or whatever. So I, you know, I think it takes, you know, and you've shared before, you know, are you willing to have this conversation today? You know, I'd like to, you know, I think it needs some prep work almost to be able to have that conversation, to find out someone's willingness to step into that space. You know, I really like the idea of the taking turns. I thought it was fascinating too that you go, like, it takes as long as it takes, there isn't a set time, because I'd be going like, well, you've had your 5 minutes, you know, so it's like, now it's my 5 minutes, you know, so I think just being, you know, being able to settle and listen, you know, and to really hear, ask questions, you know, for clarification. And, you know, I have friends that are, and I love this, you know, I don't want to have all friends that are just like me. I mean, A, boring, B, you know, like, it doesn't stretch me. So I love having friends that are all over the gamut on every level of everything, you know, because it makes me examine my values and where I'm coming from. And, you know, I've really learned a lot about myself. Some of the things it has made me more committed to my values on some levels. You know, there are certain things that's just really refined it, but I'm better able to articulate it. And other things I've gone, gosh, I can understand, you know, that perspective, and I hadn't looked at it that way before. And so having the room and the interest, I mean, I like people and I want to know where they're coming from. So having the ability to do that. I had an interesting email this morning, that, you know, like I reread what I wrote, and it was not snarky or anything. And this person just took it, and, you know, and it went really sideways. And I was going to respond, and I thought, no good will come of that, because this person is not in a place to hear. I mean, like, I was offering resources and all of that, and they were in a victimized place and perceived. It just wasn't, you know, they perceived anything I said was lecturing them, and I was like offering them free resources. So it was like one of those, you can't win. So it really shuts down a conversation. There's no conversation, you know, if you aren't able to, you know, to step into that space. So, and I like the dreams, like, because I think people articulating their dreams, and you go, gosh, like, can we get there together? You know, can I help you make your dream come true? And particularly, you know, are there places where our dreams, you know, overlap? You know, how cool is that?
Yeah.
So we've got some questions, and one of them, I think this, you know, kind of goes to, like, it ties into the topic too. So, due to the shit show I've been living in, my husband's sex porn addiction for the past 2 years, I'm now subjected to severe anxiety, enough that I have had 3 panic attacks over the last month, before, during job interviews. A dear friend presented me with a job opportunity of doing home health care a few nights per week. I was excited to finally have a way to make some income, have days free to help our daughter with my grandson, and give me a much needed distraction out of this house. Husband freaked that I wouldn't be home at night. In spite of letting him know that this would be really helpful for me, he forbade it, implying that there would be dire consequences if I went through with it. How do you suggest that I address this dire need for my own self-care?
This is such a difficult situation when you feel like there's a gun to your head, with, you know, when you say there will be dire consequences if I go through with it. What I've seen effective in situations like this is coming from the place of, I'm asking for your support, not your permission. And sometimes in order to give support, a person needs to be reassured or have a map of what things might actually look like. So, it could be the case, and if I'm getting your husband wrong in this, take this with a grain of salt. It could be the case that when he thinks about you being gone at night, um, he has a lot of anxiety about being alone, or maybe he feels like your job is going to become more important than he is. And maybe as you're looking at, you described it as a shit show, maybe you want something more important than he is. But when you come from that place of I'm looking for your support, not your permission, it puts you in a place of power where you're automatically willing to negotiate instead of when somebody says no, you're being shut down. So it might be like, hey, this is going to be 3 nights a week, or this is going to be 2 nights a week. And what the other nights of the week are going to look like is this. If you have something that you need or you need me to pay attention to so that you don't feel XYZ, or so that, you can be reassured of whatever, let me know what it is you need from me. If that means on one of the nights that I'm home, you want to go out and have some one-on-one time, tell me. I would be open to that. But I think for you, the key is recognize when you said this is dire self-care. I think of self-care and myself are like a mother bear and her cub. I don't put anything between that because it's not good. And I think that's some of the internal shift you might want to look at there is making sure you can hold on to that. This is a need, and I'm not asking for your permission. This is something that I need to do. I will be doing. And I'm open if you have concerns or something that I can help you with as a result of, what you might be left holding, or what might be hard for you. I would be open to considering that. But I think when it comes to self-care, it's a really tricky proposition to wait until somebody feels great about us doing that. Because often what I see in couples, especially early on in recovery, there is not a whole lot of flexibility in give and take. And if the non-addicted spouse waits until their spouse is okay with them taking care of themselves, I've often seen that I'm okay with this and I can do this. It doesn't come unless they're pushed. So this might be one of those situations where if your husband has the opportunity to develop here, he might need a push, and this might be the push. And it's okay. It's okay for him to be made uncomfortable by this.
Yeah, and I hear healthy boundaries. It's like you were saying, I'm looking for your support, not your permission. And that's a healthy boundary to me. It's like it isn't I want to do this. It's like I really need to do this. And I can imagine that there's some fear for him. I'm just reading this, but I'm going like, I bet he's going like, what happens if you get out there and find out there's this whole other life, and it's really good, and then what about me? And which addicts are, it's all what about me? So I like what Jon was saying. If there's a space to say, let's talk about what your concerns are or whatever, but having a dialogue about it. And if he's pushing back, at the end of the day, hopefully you will choose your self-care, because it sounds like you desperately need to do this for you. So
I've seen, and I will just say in situations like this, I've seen some financial parity. So you having your own income and your own money, it makes a huge emotional difference. I think it's hard to feel like an equal when you can't trust your partner to keep up the agreement to care for each other. So it can be a huge source of relief for you to be working outside of the home and have your own income and realize, I can do this and I am competent in this. And I would be really careful about what I gave that up for.
So the next question, when asking open-ended questions, if the response is something similar to I don't know, is that typically a good time to pause and give space for the responder to express more and then ask another curious question, or drop the subject?
I would say you have to ask your partner about that. I don't know can be a really frustrating answer to get, because when I work with couples and they're having these kinds of conversations, I don't know often feels dismissive. and it often feels like your partner's not trying. So stopping and asking, saying something like, this is really important for me to understand. When you say I don't know, are you open to taking some time to thinking a little bit more about that and maybe figuring it out? Um, and if your partner responds like, yeah, I do want to think about that, I do want to give you an answer there, I don't know what it is right now. That may indicate that your partner's still willing to discuss, or your partner may say, wow, that's a really big question, I feel like I need to answer that before we move on. Then it might be time to stop the conversation and give some space. And here I think an agreed upon timeout strategy is always important. Because just saying like, okay, we'll come back to this. A lot of couples in this situation, they don't have a track record of coming back to difficult things. So you want to set some time for it. Like it may be, let's pick this up tomorrow night after you've had a day to think about it. It may be, let me collect my thoughts. Let's check back in 20 minutes. But if you're going to table the discussion, it helps both of you to have some accountability in when we're going to come back to this. If you ask your partner, what does that I don't know mean? Are you open to thinking about that? And they say no, I think it's important, if our goal is to support the relationship and feed the relationship, I think it's important for the person who's saying, no, I don't want to talk about it, to say that. I don't feel like I can go there right now. Or I don't want to talk about this with you. And to do that in a compassionate way rather than an angry way. I think this would be, I can understand this is really painful for you, that I don't want to go here, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. That's where I'm stuck right now. So I would appreciate it if we could have an understanding that I can't or won't go here right now, but there's so many other places I'd be willing to go with, So anytime we're saying no to our partner, if we want to support the relationship, give them a yes in another area. I can't hear, but I can hear. So back to the previous question about, being gone a few nights a week to work. I won't be available on Thursday nights for you, but if you want Friday night to be our night, I can make that happen. So some of that flexibility, that give and take, that can show that there's willingness to still reach and still be connected, even when we need to say no or want to say no.
And I was thinking, I mean, there have been times when somebody, and I really didn't know. And so I think part of it would be the tone. If I went, I don't know, or I don't know, I mean, I think there's probably something in the tone with which it's said, but I think like you were talking about, John, too, it's like, if I say no, I might need to go talk to my sponsor, I need to go figure this out or whatever, but being willing to come back to it, if it's an appropriate topic at some point as well. So, but hopefully hopefully the recognition that you're asking to step into this space, is also, viewed by the other person as wanting to move the relationship forward. Next one. Wow, sounds like a lot of work, a healthy relation more than unhealthy relation, where you aren't allowed to express yourself and what you think, feel, want. This is my case, at least. So yeah, I think healthy relationships do take a lot of work.
I think they're a lot more work than unhealthy relationships, actually. But it's, I'm a gardener. I like to grow things, and there's just not an easy way to set that up. There's not a maintenance-free way to set that up. If you want something to look manicured and beautiful, you have to manicure it and beautify it. And I think it's the same thing with a healthy relationship. Just like a healthy body, you can't put whatever in and push it to its limits. You really have to know the boundaries. You have to take care of it. You have to give it proper fuel. So yeah, it is a lot of work, but I would say the reward for a healthy relationship far outweighs any of the effort you put into it.
Yes, knowing somebody is by your side, is supporting you, the connection, we are better, against the world than I am alone. I mean, health wise. I mean, there's so many benefits to it, but yeah, I mean, like for me, like the meaningful things in my life are the relationships, and it's because, you know, I do cultivate them, I do work on them, I'm willing to step into, you know, even difficult spaces, you know, because I, like, even when somebody's you know, having a reaction or whatever, I do want to understand, you know, why there's something going on. And last week I was having a really bad moment, and um, um, I've shared before, I get a little control freakish. And I was like, I had forgotten all the lessons I had learned in the program and was trying to control every detail so that I had a certain outcome. And it really wasn't going well. And I was driving everyone crazy, you know, and I mean, I just lost it. And fortunately, I had people that were willing to step in with me, you know, and get me back on track and just explain that they cared and all that. They didn't just go, whoa, you know, and I was like, besides the fact that the program works and the serenity prayer, I got no control over anything outside of myself, but that I had meaningful relationships where people weren't just dismissive, they stepped in.
When
That, like,
I look at that, the first reach where that was probably really uncomfortable for everybody. The first reach, you really felt like, Tammy, we care for you. And I would say you can't go wrong in your relationship if your first reach is that. And sometimes it has to be really explicit. Like, I have to say the words, I'm saying this because I really love you. I really care for you. I can tell you're hurting right now. That goes such a long way in being able to offer some feedback or some correction. Sometimes we don't feel like we have the luxury for that. But I'd say with a lot of the couples that I work with, you don't want to skip over that step, no matter how pressing it feels that we've got to make a change. You don't want to skip over that step.
well, you know, and replaying it, like, their tone was soft and
Mm-hmm.
soothing. I mean, it was like, you know, I care about you. All of this other stuff, you know, I care about you. And I was like, oh, you know, I mean, so yes, like all of this relationship stuff, you know, it's worth it to have, you know, healthy relationships,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of work. Okay, so as Tammy was saying, when seen as interrogating or lecturing during curious questions, in what ways do you suggest easing into or improving this type of connection?
I think consent is always key in this. So again, if the tone is right, the question's right, but it comes out of, you know, it's just the automatic response. I think in many cases that can be seen as some of the interrogating or the lecturing. You know, so a simple like, hey, I have a question, are you open? Or I'm curious about some things. Um, do you want those questions now or do you want them later? Giving that person ability to respond, particularly with the mother and mesh men that I work with. Mother and mesh men have so many space issues and they're so sensitive to incursions into space in any way. So for them, it's less about how did you pose the question, and it's more about you just got in my space and I didn't know you were coming, or maybe I didn't want you to come, or you didn't ask if you could. And there's a piece of me before I really started working deeply with these guys where there's a big piece of me that was like, just get over it. You're in a relationship. Um, but that's not possible in those types of situations. And so what helps is if, as the partner, you recognize your partner has an enduring vulnerability around that. So maybe you know, I had a friend several years ago who would say when their mother was upset, she would hound and hound and hound until somebody confessed. And so what I learned with this person is when there were difficult things we needed to talk about or work through, I really had to pace the questions and I really had to, you know, make sure that hounding feeling wasn't there. Not because I felt like it was just some quirk this person had. I recognized there was an enduring vulnerability, a hurt there, and I was willing to help them in that way. So, you know, if you know that your partner, doesn't matter how you pose the question, if they have a sensitivity to you posing questions, recognizing that during vulnerability, you might start with, I have a question, are you open to that right now? Or that makes me wonder about some things. Would you mind if I asked you? And then it's on your partner to give you a truthful answer. If your partner says, sure, ask the questions, and they're defensive, they didn't give you the correct answer there. That person also has to recognize that they have ability to say, maybe later I could be open to some questions, but I'm feeling pretty raw with what I just shared with you. Brene Brown refers to that as the vulnerability hangover. And a lot of us, as we work on our vulnerability and our connection and that kind of stuff, we can tolerate a little more closeness, but some of us are doing really good to just say what we feel, and we can't tolerate a response in that moment, and we can't take any more information or get any more vulnerable in that moment. And so again, being able to slow down the timeline. If that person says, no, I'm not open to questions right now, give me some time. Um, Again, it's a big ask of the partner to wait. But if that helps the conversation, to me, it's more about keeping the conversation going and eventually completing the conversation than it is about completing it right now. And that's hard, especially when it feels like things are real critical.
Well, and you've got competing needs, wants. If somebody is going, I need space, and the other person's going, I want to connect and engage, I want to understand. So it's it definitely is a balancing act, but like you said, if ultimately it is about more understanding and doing what's best for the relationship, finding that space where it's going to work for both of you,
Mm-hmm.
would be the goal. So next question. So when the mother enmeshment is sharing, is it best to nod in response instead of asking follow-up questions?
No, not always. I think the key there is, again, for mother enmeshed men, they live their life feeling as if they have no choice and nobody's expecting them to have choice. And whether that's true or not, it's that enduring vulnerability. So rather than just default to nodding and saying um, asking for some buy-in. Hey, I have some follow-up questions about that. Would you be open? Or this makes me really I'm curious about something you said. Can I ask a clarifying question? Um, what I see in most cases, when that guy says yes and he means yes, you can go to the ends of the earth with what it is you want to know. And the key for him, it's not that you asked it in the right way or that you have a really great question. It's that he felt him say, yes, I'm agreeing to us sharing this space, and I'm agreeing to us going further with this. Um, and on the other hand, I've also seen the same outcome, just getting there in a little bit of a longer way, when the guy can say, no, I'm not open. And that can be respected. And not as in we leave it alone forever. Like, okay, I get you can't talk about that right now, or it's hard for you to go there right now. Would you be willing to go there with me at some point? Yeah, I could get ready for that. And then I'll see with a lot of those mother mesh men, if they're in good recovery with that, they may say, I want to talk with my therapist first, or let me talk with my support group first, or let me do some journaling first, and I'll come back to you and I'll let you know where I can go. The magic word, or for me, the most hopeful sign from someone who has difficulty engaging that way relationally is when they can give you a yes that they mean. So giving as many opportunities as possible for that person to say yes to something is a step in the right direction. So the key is not defaulting to not asking, but or not asking questions. Default to getting that buy-in, that yes.
That makes sense. Next question. My spouse lashed out at me and attacked me. I stayed calm and said, okay. He hung up and I was the one who felt bad. I tried to be understanding and sent a text. I'm sorry you are in so much pain, and I'm here for you always. He never responded. So being loving and kind is not always the answer.
Yeah, I don't think being loving and kind always gets us what we want from another person. I look at this from two angles. So first, if I were in your shoes and I looked at, like, I'm calm, I said, okay, I reached out, I'm sorry you're hurting. Regardless of the response I got back, I would feel proud of what I did. That would not be something that I would think, gosh, how is this going to come up in an argument later? And I'm going to have to explain this or that. Like, there's nothing to explain. I care for you. I could tell you you're hurting. I wanted to reach out to you. If you don't want to pick that up, like, that hurts me and I'm sad about that. But I look at that and I think you can be proud of how you handled that. Now, when it comes to, getting the outcome you may want, yeah, love and kindness doesn't always get us what we want from other people, because it's not a magic combination to suddenly have what we'd hope for appear in front of us. If you're wanting a response, any response, you could send something more confrontational. I bet you'd get a response. If you're wanting to demonstrate or to note your care and your feeling for that person, you did it. So that's where I think I often have to reorient to, I have to start with, how do I interact here in a way that I can be proud of? Because I know that if I get overwhelmed with shame, or I start having to walk back on things that I'm saying or doing, I'm not in a good place to be open to a relationship. So I'm not giving myself a good chance to be connected. So I always start with, what can I be proud of? And then the second part would be to look at what's effective for my partner. If I really want a response, I might need to take a different approach than a soft one. Does that make sense? But for that different approach rather than a soft one, I go back to that first question: can I be proud of whatever that approach is? There are ways to be confrontational that are still, I would say, kind, and are still understanding. They just have some sharper edges or some more directness to them.
And yeah, I'm looking at this going, yes, you did, you loved a broken person. So I'm looking at it as, you're loving somebody who's broken, and you're expecting a response that a normal non-broken person, would be able to, like me last week, I was like, I made amends because like I needed to. So, but I was willing to step back into it. But, it's very challenging when it feels so one-sided. But at the end of the day, all I can be is responsible for my behavior
Mm-hmm.
and what I did. But, you didn't apologize for what you said or did. You said, I'm sorry you are in pain and I'm here for you. I think that was,
Yep.
that's reaching out and saying, I think you did a good job. So
Yeah. How could that have felt if your reach out was, I caused all this, I take it all back? That would be a really hard space to live in. I really like in that the focus is on your partner's feelings, because clearly that's what was commanding the room. Yelling at you, hanging up the phone. That's not a time to have a discussion about who is right, who is wrong. That's a hurting person showing that they're hurt, and you tuned right into that. And that, like Tammy said, with a relationally functioned person, that goes a different way. And with someone who's not relationally functioning, I would say that's still a good way to respond, because you're not taking on anything that's not yours.
yeah, and you're still putting on the message out there. I care about you,
Yep.
so I think that was good. Any other questions or comments? We've got a few more minutes. So Dr. Rob shared this last night on the webinar. I wrote it down, but it kind of goes to what we're talking about. But he said, like, when clients come to us at Seeking Integrity, he said, it's like they're broken glass, and we don't glue them all back together again, but we do organize the pieces, and kind of give them the super glue, so that when they're, going back to their world, they can put those pieces together in a way that it's meaningful. And I was like, oh, that made so much sense. But, I was thinking about with this last share that, that person's got a bunch of broken glass and some sharp edges, as you had said a few minutes ago as well. So. Well, if there's no other questions, oh, we do. There you go. Somebody was typing. What I learned from Jon in another webinar: 1, listening; 2, ask good questions, open-ended; and 3, expressing empathy.
That, I've had to get good in my life at talking to really difficult people in situations where I would want to run for the door or put that person in their place. And I feel like I can take that recipe to the bank. Not because it gets a great outcome every time, but because I fare better and I stay more present when that's what I focus on in my interactions with somebody who may not have an agenda in connecting.
Yeah, well, and at the end of the day, I'm responsible for my actions and reactions. And if, if I follow 1, 2, and 3, I can be okay with what I've done, even if, like you said, the outcome isn't, isn't as optimal because the other person wasn't willing to show up. So.
Yeah.
But I love it when we hear, and we've had people in the past that have said, I listened to what you said and I've done it and here's what happens, and I'm like, that's what the point of all of these webinars and support groups and everything else is so that you can have some practical tools to use in relationships in the here and now.
And they're not fully formed, custom made tools. They're starting points, places for you to start experiencing or experimenting. So none of this is a theory that fits your situation perfectly, but it gives you a place to start, and it gives you some additional components to start experimenting with. Your situation, your partner can be vastly different from the situations I described here. So take these components, see how it goes, see how you feel about it, and be open to adjusting what you might need to adjust. And some of that will be clear because you'll feel it, and some of it will be clear because your partner gives you feedback. My spouse and I were in marriage therapy a couple of years ago. One of the things I learned from her is what I thought was active listening and empathizing, she found patronizing.
Oh.
And I so appreciated that feedback because I couldn't understand why I was getting the response that I was getting. I was like, I'm doing right. And she had to give me some really helpful feedback in how that felt for her. And so I went back to the drawing board and figured out a different way to approach it, and a way for her to hear what it was that I was feeling and saying that didn't sound patronizing to her. But it wasn't scrap the whole tool. It was go back to this component and see what you need to change.
But I love that you were willing to hear what she had to say too. So, I mean, with all of this, whether it's with your spouse or partner or just, friends, family, or whatever, a lot of it is, am I willing to engage? Am I willing to, work on having a healthier relationship?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Well, Jon, it's been great to see you again. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll sub in again at some time, but until then,
I hope so.
thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. Great questions. And I really appreciate, Jon, the information on values, goals, and lifestyles. That's an excellent topic.
Thanks. I'll see you guys in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.